Okay, so it starts out with the manifest information. Here I can give the management pack a name, and just to make sure it's unique, I'll put my initials at the start of this. You can modify the version number here to anything you want. Same for friendly name and description. Now I need to choose whether I want to save this management pack into the store database or onto my file system. Of course, if I want to leverage the version control capabilities and the rest of the features in MP Studio, I'm going to put this in my store database. These are the default references, but you can use the button in the bottom right to add additional references. And now I'm presented with an option to create an empty management pack, a management pack for a single server application or for a distributed application. Now I'm not going to go through each of these. I do want to give you a quick peek at distributed application. And this will give you some sense of the possibilities with MP Author. So here you can see we've got an option to start defining the roles or targets for the front end, the middle tier, and the back end. So you may have, a web service at the front end, and in the middle you could have, an application running a service, and at the back end you might have a database. And so you can create targets for all of those. So this is just a little bit of, a more sophisticated management pack that you could create. I'm going to back up here, launch this wizard again, and we'll create one for a single server application. Saving it to the store, accept the default references, select a single server application. In this particular case, you'll see the options for creating that role or target include the ability to use a registry setting, or you could use the script setting or WMI. In this particular case, I'll browse to the registry on the server I'm installed on. And perhaps we'll go in here into software. Let's look in the Microsoft folder, see if we have something interesting. I'm sure we do. For example, we've got Microsoft SQL Server in here. And I'll just randomly select a value and then choose the Add button. So that's how easy that is to build that. You can put in some optional properties as well if you wish. I could add other registry values in here. Now what you'll notice is that the name is defaulted based on the information or what I had selected in the previous dialog box. Next, I need to identify the target, and as Mike had shown earlier, there's lots in here you could choose from. I'll just leave it at the default Windows local application. And once again, we're going to build a discovery at the same time. So I'm going to enable this by default, but you can change that. And then the name, again, is built based on what I'd selected in the previous dialog. Here's our discovery target. So we try to steer the user into selecting the most appropriate option, but you can go in there and further customize. Now, if I had multiple values in here, I could build a logical expression. I can check for the existence of it if that's all I want to do. Next, we'll set a schedule for the discovery, and you can modify this if you want it to run once a day or every X number of hours, heaven forbid minutes or seconds. Select next. And that's pretty much it. There's the summary for creating this. And in the next step, you can go in and create a monitor. And I'm not going to create all of these monitors, but just to give you an idea, you could create a database monitor, an event monitor, performance, script, service, or a website monitor. Let's just do a performance monitor. Now I could browse out to that application server on my network. I'll just use the box I'm installed on here. And now I can customize all these items, pick the object I want to include. Perhaps we'll go up a little bit and I'll use process. And now I can modify which counter. Let's take a look at percent processor time, determine if I want to collect all instances or not. I can modify the number of samples, sample rate, maybe I want to go X number of seconds, etc. And then select a target. In my particular case, I'd created my own target earlier. I can also choose to create a rule to collect the performance data at the same time, just by checking that checkbox. So it's all about trying to save you time and simplify things here. Once again, we're defaulting the name for this, and it is enabled by default, but you can change any of that. You may want to modify the name, but we're just making it a little bit easier by defaulting based on the information provided in the previous screen. Now I can customize the number of samples to anything but one, and then I have the option to create either a average or consecutive type. I'll just set the threshold here to 50. So down below you can see the health state. This is what you would normally go with, but you do have the option to also modify that information. Last but not least, if I want this to generate an alert, I can just check that checkbox and then customize the rest of the data. When do you want this alert to be generated? There's the alert name defaulted. You can come in and modify the priority as well as the severity. You can modify any of those. And then down below you'll see the description. If you have used an earlier copy of MP Author in our most recent release, we did add these buttons down the side so that you can now modify the description just by clicking on any of those and pick what you'd like to include in your description. Select next, and now we're ready to create this performance monitor. So we could add additional monitors if we want. Next, we can define the roll-up algorithm, and 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to use the worst of instead of best of. Click on Finish. This will refresh my screen, and we'll see the management pack that we've been authoring. Next, we'll take a look at MP Studio. This is the main MP Studio console. Oops, I forgot one thing I wanted to point out while we're looking there at MP Author, but that's fine. I'll talk about it here momentarily. So here's my store database. I've got in here all my vendor management packs from Microsoft. You can add those into the store database for future use, but I'm also keeping in here my line of business management packs in a project folder called My LOBMPs. I've got a backup folder containing a backup of the management group that I've registered. So as my override MPs change, MP Studio is going to be backing those up. I've set a schedule to do that, and I've also registered one management group. So this tree represents all the management packs I have installed in my management group. But let's take a look at advanced authoring. To demonstrate that, I will open the version 1005 of my new LOB. I'm just going to right click on that, and I can choose to view and edit. And so you'll notice what looks very similar to the MP Author application now embedded, if you will, within the main console of MP Studio. So if you own MP Studio, you don't need to install MP Author. You can do all the authoring you need right in MP Studio and have the convenience of those feature sets in the stored database. So for example, in order to do that, if you wanted to start developing a new management pack, you could just simply right-click on a folder in the store and choose to create a new management pack. Okay, so I've already created one. What I'm going to do next is I want to point out some of the differences between MP Studio and MP Author, the free version. So if I right-click on monitors, you'll see here are the different types of monitors we support. And so in MP Studio, we have the ability to create a new process monitor. So that is unavailable in MP Author. We also have the ability to create a new dependency rollup monitor and an aggregate monitor. So those three capabilities have been added as advanced features in MP Studio. Additionally, there's a couple of other things in here in MP Studio that we've added. For example, if I right-click on relationships, you can create a new relationship. So if you're working on dependency rollup monitors, that would be important. Additionally, you can right-click on targets, and if you want to create a new class, you have that option in MP Studio to create a new class right from here. So there are lots of other things you can author in both MP Author and MP Studio, but I just wanted to point out those subtle differences. So let's do a little bit of authoring here. I'm going to let's create a new rule. This is available either in MP Studio Advanced Authoring or in MP Author. Again, you can browse out to that application server to start with and use this discovery capability that will allow you to just pick and choose what you want to add, as you'll see when I step through the wizard. So lots and lots of our customers are happy working in XML and doing that type of thing, and I'm sure we're going to see some very cool stuff when Brian goes into Visual Studio as well. Personally, in a former life, very technical, now not so much. That's why I prefer doing any of the authoring I do. I do it in MP Studio or MP Author because I can use the wizards. So in this particular case, first thing I want to do is pick which log file I'd like to work with. We'll stick with the application log file, and now I can build my expression. And as you see, first thing you want to do is pick the property here. I could choose from any of these. I'll stick with event ID. You can then determine if you want to have this equal or not equal, so on. In my case, I'll stick with the equal, and you can even use that drop-down menu to pick the event ID number. So I'm just going to randomly select, let's go with event ID 1000. We could use event source equals, and then from that combo box or drop-down box, pick from the list. Let's go with MS SQL Server, and I'm going to leave the target as Windows Computer, but you can modify that here as well. Okay, select next. There's the default naming convention, and as you can see, some of this is starting to get a bit repetitive in the sense that we're doing that naming for you, but you can customize those things. We try to leverage templates or standard screens where possible as you're going through this, just to make that authoring a little bit easier for you. We're going to have this generate alert and collect data, but I can now modify the rest of the settings, alert priority, alert severity. You can customize any of those as you go through it, including display names and descriptions. Next, I want to specify a schedule. We can leave it at none, or we can go in and say, you know what, I'd like to do this on a daily basis. You can even set the start time and end time, or you may choose a periodic schedule and have this run every X number of minutes. Perhaps every 15 minutes is a little too often. You might want to change that and go with, I don't know, once an hour or something, whatever makes sense. Okay, and that's all there is to creating a rule. And now I'd like to I'm going to create an aggregate monitor here in a minute, but I want to show you a little bit more what's available to you inside MP Studio as you're working with this MP. Now, you've seen this screen before as Mike was doing his demo. I'll just point out a couple of other things. On the right-hand side, you've got the Properties View Edit panel or window pane there. Anything you see in here that's bold, you can go in there and modify that information. So even the name, you could go in there and make changes to that. Okay, let's look at some of the other things, perhaps a little bit more interesting. I could go in and modify that schedule. Let's go down. Actually, before I make a change here, I'll point out there's an asterisk across the top where we have the title. This management pack is in the store. Because it has that asterisk, I know that I haven't saved the latest state. And one of the most popular features in MP Studio is to manage versions. So we're working with the version 1.0.0.5, as you can see. I'm going to save that MP. Here's just a prompt that will show the differences or the changes between the one that's in the store, in other words, my 1005. You'll note that we've incremented the version to 6. And there's a total of 4 additions at this point and 1 change. So down below is a preview of the audit history. So in this case, we're tracking who made the change and the time of a change. You have an option down here to add some notes, who added it, why it was added. You wouldn't necessarily need to say who because as you can see that's logged, but maybe you even have a work order number that you want to put in there, or perhaps a stakeholder made a specific request and you want to record that. So you could do that here and capture that information in the MP Studio store database. You'll notice now we have a version 1.006 in the database. Later, we can look at the audit history and we'll take a quick peek at that. So we've saved that into the store. Now I'm going to come back into the Properties View Edit and let's just change a value such as the state. And I'll change it from false to true. Okay, let's scroll down, see what else we've got in here. There's discard, level, remotable, etc. We can modify any of those in here. And so there's other ways to do that editing. You could right-click on the rule or monitor that you created, and there's an option in here to do some other things. You could even drop down into the XML if you choose to view, edit the XML here. Okay, so we see the asterisk is back. I'm going to save that one more time. We'll click through this dialog box just to get a little bit more information in there. That was identified as a change. And let's do one more. I'm going to change the confirm delivery because I forgot to point out just how that gets logged. We'll save that. And here in this pop-up dialog box, what I meant to point out earlier is when you're making a change, we're actually recording the previous value and the new value for you, and that'll be available in the audit history. So this, doesn't necessarily, the auditing part isn't authoring per se, but any of you who do a lot of authoring or maybe you dabble in some development, I can certainly tell you our guys who write code is very important as they write code to manage the bits and pieces of code as it gets authored into the code stream. And so auditing is an important part of that. If you ever need to go back and find out why a change was made, that information is captured. Or perhaps you just simply need to understand the differences between multiple versions of a management pack. You can do that with MP Studio as you're developing the management pack. Or perhaps there's a team involved in that authoring of a management pack. There's guys who, if it's a little bit more complex, you might involve 2 or 3 developers who are each going to put their part into that management pack. And so having MP Studio in the store database and a way to manage versions will be very helpful. And the guy can come in and just simply right-click on a management pack in the store database and be able to start working with it. Clicking on the top, you see you have an option to check in or check out, get at the audit history, and we're going to look at that audit history in a minute. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is demonstrate one more monitor creation, one of the new ones that we've added into advanced authoring. And I know Brian was talking about an aggregate roll-up monitor earlier in his first session. And so let's just take a look at that advanced authoring capability available in MP Studio. So you can see the table of contents on the left-hand side. These are the steps we're going to go through. What I need to do here when I begin creating this roll-up monitor is just to select the health categories that are going to be rolled up. So you could pick one or more of these health categories and then specify how they're going to be rolled up. So, you know, if you, in the end, what we're going to take is multiple monitors, and we don't want each one of those monitors generating an alert. We're going to aggregate 2 or 3 of them such that if 2 or 3 of them happen to be in an alert state, then we want that aggregate monitor to alert. Okay, so we're going to leave this set to worst of, select next, and now I need to identify the target. So it's defaulted to Windows Computer. I'm going to leave that, but I just want to highlight the fact that you can go in there and modify that target. I'm working with display names. You could change that as well. I'm just a little more comfortable with the display names. And we're going to, you know, leave this enabled to start with. Here's the name for my aggregate roll-up monitor, and you could modify this and add to the name if you wish. Select next. Now we're going to determine if we want this to generate an alert or not. So this is a very, you know, common, we've seen this screen before, and that just makes it a lot easier to work with. You can come in and customize that description, and I'll just, you know, pick a couple of items in here perhaps, just demonstrate that you can do that. Okay, so clicking next, now we're on to the monitor section, and I do have a few monitors here that I can choose from, and I need to pick which ones I'm going to roll up into the new aggregate monitor. So now I just need to look at these ones to make sure I'm picking the ones that are related and important in order to build this aggregate monitor. So I'll pick the bottom 2 here and select these 2 monitors. Now you'll note there is an option here to disable the alerts for those selected monitors that are going to be aggregated. So let's check that so we're not getting all the alerts, we're just getting the aggregate if that condition is met. So that's all there is to creating an aggregate monitor. And once again, the objective here in both MP Author and MP Studio is to simplify things by using wizards to help our customers who are typically IT professionals, not necessarily, you know, developers and experts in XML. So just before I hand it over to Brian, that's your cue, you're up here shortly, I just want to take a couple of minutes and point out some of the other things you would leverage MP Studio for. As you can see, I've got several versions. Let's just save the latest changes into the store database. Now we've got several, I don't know, 9 or 10 different versions in there. I can right-click on the root of that folder here in order to create the audit history. Briefly, I'll point out you can schedule this as well. So you don't have to do this on a manual basis. If you're developing an MP and you would like to share that with other stakeholders, you can set up this schedule to run that every day, generate a report, publish it to a folder in your network. You can even set it up so that you can send email to the team and they would get an update on that report. So that would be very useful sharing information. So instead of setting up that schedule, let's just take a look at that audit history report. And here we have it. There's a lot of data in here. What our customers appreciate, or one of the things they appreciate, is the ability to come in here and slice and dice or further customize any table you see in MP Studio. So, for example, if you have a team working on a management pack, it would make sense to group by the change by field. And you may also want to group by changed on. So there's one way to go about customizing this grid, and then you can go in and see items that have changed. In this particular case, I've got, you know, a couple of changes that I made earlier, and I changed the enable status from true to false. Or the confirmed delivery, I changed from false to true. This is important information to capture, and if you've got change management committees and you can share with them, you know, if we export this to Excel, we can very quickly document that table in a way that's quite easy to share, and this basically reflects the same view we had in the earlier table. Okay, so we've got all that audit history information available in here. So, okay, we're just about ready to put a wrap on this, and a couple more minor things I'd like to share with you on MP Studio. That's one option, the audit history. You also have an option to come in and test the management pack. This is a simulation. The cool thing is you can simulate this against a server or a computer on your network. Now, I'm not going to run the whole thing. I just want to show you the wizard here that you would step through. So as long as you've got the management pack in MP Studio, you could test that management pack against a server on your network. And if that server has to have the operations manager agent on it, you need to be a local administrator, so you just provide those credentials, and then you can test that management pack. In this case, it's defaulting to 5 minutes, but you could run that test for an hour or a day. So if you're authoring stuff and you want to find out if it's working properly or as expected, is it generating the alerts you expect? Is the discovery functioning the way you expect? You can get all that information by using this test feature. Okay, so let's see, you click next, and that's it for the wizard. All right, so you need to be a local admin on any server you want to test against, but MP Studio is going to cache the information about the management pack, it'll cache the information about its references, and then it'll start, assuming you've got all the necessary permissions, collecting the perfmon data, the event data, and it'll compare that to the configuration of your management pack. And so to just show you what an example of that would be like, this particular test I ran did not generate alerts, okay? But let's take a look at the data that was collected. This is one of the management packs I had authored, so nothing really fancy. I've just got this one monitor in here looking at percent privilege time, and you can chart that, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. That's a little bit noisy on its own, but the good thing is you could also see, you know, these events. Here are the events that were generated. Here are the discoveries that were generated, and I can see the data that was collected for those. And if there were alerts generated in that test, they would have shown up here. Okay, so I have a feeling I'm going on just a little bit farther than I wanted to here, but happy to answer any questions you might have on MP Studio. I've been sending out my email address. I'm happy to set you up with an evaluation. I've also, you know, notified everybody there's like a crazy price available on MP Studio for anybody who purchases this advanced authoring tool in August. Okay, that's it. I would like to hand things over to Brian. I see the chat window has been busy here, and hope it's not because I've gone way over, but Georgia, Heather, do you want to switch things up for?
I'm going to give control.
Did you want to answer? Yeah, did you want to answer some questions at the end of the session along with Brian?
I think that's the best way to go because I want to make sure we're leaving lots of time for that. But I'll make sure every question gets answered.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Over to you, Georgia.
Yep. Thanks, Randy. That was great. Brian's next. Brian, you should have control.
Jump in into Visual Studio here. My little bit of a disclaimer that I'll give, I really don't have a script for walking through to show off VSAE, so I might be a little bit clunky here in the things I'm going to show, but certainly I think I can give you a good flavor for how the tool works and really distinguish it from the MP Author tool that Randy just showed. So as I mentioned this morning earlier in my session, there's a pretty significant difference between the tools and the complexity level that you're going to deal with. The general rule that I would suggest is if you can do what you need to do with MP Author, then you should use MP Author. There's really no reason to get into the complexities of using the Visual Studio tool unless there are some things that you need to do beyond that, basically doing custom modules, custom workflows, and doing that kind of work. That being said, let me kind of show an example here, and you can certainly contrast between the different tools. So what I actually have loaded up here, the management pack that I showed a very brief little intro to earlier. This is the one that my whole training is built on. And if you go out to the Virtual Academy training, this actually is the latest version of that one. I go through all the lessons step by step in getting this thing created and building everything in it. So just fairly brief walkthrough here. First off, the authoring extensions is a free download. We have it out there for Visual Studio 2013. It is going to be available for 2015. I don't know when, but talking with the engineering team, they are going to be making that available. So what I have here, though, in one solution, I can actually have multiple management pack files, right? In our case, I just have two, one for all my main service and health model, and then a separate one for dashboards, which I haven't built out yet, but it's ready to go. And obviously, one management pack can actually be implemented in multiple files. And so we can load those into a single solution. We can compile them all at once in the whole bit. A very basic, really fundamental concept to understand here is what we're doing is really separating out our source from the final MP. So everything you see here that I'm looking at in Solution Explorer is really constructed for my personal purposes. I have all these folders that I built as just my personal preference of how to organize this. When you create a new management pack, it's going to look more like this one with nothing in it, basically, but references. So this whole health model, service model, I've broken out classes, discoveries. I've got a folder there for that. I've chosen, I'll get to what these different elements are in a moment, but I've chosen to separate things out this way. All just how I choose to do that. When I go through and I actually build the management pack and we do a compile, much like you would compile code in Visual Studio, what it does then is basically go through all of these different sections. There's a little snippet of XML showing there. Takes all those together and generates a final management pack where all of these elements are brought into one. Okay, and so, and just before I jump into that stuff, let me show some of the properties of one of the MPs here. Just to show this off. So basically, we're doing automatic versioning on this. So every time I do a save, we're incrementing the version. When I do a build, I can automatically generate the sealed management pack. So this is a reference to the key file that I'm using for that. So every time I do a build, it's going to generate the XML, also generates the MP. And again, that in the online training, we actually go through, I think I even go through creating the key file. So we walk through doing all that. We can automatically deploy off to the management group. So as I'm doing my testing, here's my management group. It actually is off in some Azure virtual machines. If I were to do start here, we do a compile of the MP, assuming the compile works properly, it would then go off and install. Okay, so basically all of those services that you would expect, in working with the management pack. So when working with it though, so when you saw MP Author, you're basically looking at a UI that was sitting on top of all of the complex underlying XML, right? Which makes things a lot more pleasant to work with. You have wizards you can walk through and really think of the logic of what you're building as opposed to worrying about the details of the implementation. When you work at this level in Visual Studio, as you can see, you are working with the actual details. So if you were to look at the XML that gets generated by MP Author, this is what it looks like. Now, what I've got here in the value of this, if you go back in time, before we really had some decent authoring tools, we were doing all this work in just straight up XML. Just absolute XML editor. I had the entire big giant XML file loaded, and I actually got very, very good at shooting around that large file and copying and pasting and all that. So at the very least, though, what we're able to do here is separate things out. Break things up the way I want. We also, as I'll show, we also have some other services to make this easier to work with. So if you actually go into the final XML file here, there's one section for class types where all of the classes are. All the way down at the bottom of the management pack is this language pack section where all of the display strings for every single element in the entire management pack live. So when we are working back in the XML world, we basically had to go up, define my class, jump all the way to the bottom, define this display string down there, jump over to the discovery section, do that there. What I'm able to do is take all these fragments so I can logically group together at least little chunks of XML that I feel belong together. Okay, so you saw, I believe, you know, what it looks like to create a class in MP Author where you have some UI. Here, I'm pretty much looking at XML. Now we do give you a little bit of help. Let me just do a quick here. If I were to say add new item, and if I were to say add a class here, what it's going to do is create an MP fragment for me, and we give you a little bit of guidance here. Here, go in and here's some starting XML and a starting property for this. You know, it's going to need a display string, but I am working directly with the XML. Okay, so we definitely are giving you a little bit of help, but we're not going to give you kind of that UI that hides that complexity. So let me just delete that one out. And let's have a look here at my existing one. So if you remember the management pack I showed, and I showed that sample service model, and I had some of those classes, I had central server and central receiver. This is what those look like, right? This actually is the management pack that you were looking at. So central receiver has no properties on it. Or central server, central receiver here has one property on it. Central processor has a couple more properties. Okay, now if I were to create a new class, we are at least going to do some IntelliSense for you. Right, so we know the only thing that can belong here is a class type, and a class type, first off, I have to give it an ID, so I might call it mpauthor.stores. I'll just call it new class. I'm not going to keep it. Say, okay, you got to give me a base class, and then I am at least going to look, okay, you could only use for a base class other classes that are referenced from this current one, so I'm going to say, well, if I go off the Windows Management Pack, then I'd like to use computer role. Okay, so I'm not necessarily going to complete this, but you can see at least we're not just doing straight XML. We are providing some IntelliSense. We are able to help you out with some references in there. You know, so it certainly makes things a little more workable. In reality, the way you're going to use this is more like this. When I want a new class, I'm probably going to copy and paste an existing one, something like this. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to modify its name. It's a new class, and you know, maybe it's missing these two properties. It's got another property here. This really is what the development process looks like. Is a whole lot of copying and pasting, and if you go through the online training I did, that's pretty much what I do. Is a lot of copying and pasting and really trying to illustrate how we actually work with these things. And, you know, I mean, basically for those of you out there comfortable working with code, you know, sometimes working with the UI, certainly it's much more accessible. It's a lot easier to focus on the logic as opposed to the ugly detail implementation. But for the developers out there in the world who are really more comfortable with this and just being able to type and do copy paste, who are comfortable with the XML, you know, oftentimes this can be fairly effective. Certainly, you know, I've been working with this stuff for quite a while, so usually when I think management pack, this is the XML that I'm thinking about. So the other level, though, that you're going to be working with, are the other type of object. Let me just close this, and I think if I just don't do a save, it won't break anything, is something we call templates. So if I look over here, here's a set of discovery templates. Okay, now what this is doing is hiding the XML from us to some extent. So if I look here, I believe this is a registry discovery. Just looking down, some of my screen is hidden by the there. Hopefully that didn't mess anything up. That's Just the webinar controls are kind of hiding the right side of my screen, so I couldn't see that. So this here is a registry discovery, okay? And you saw kind of in the MP Author tool creating a discovery and how straightforward that is. If I do a new discovery here, I'll say new custom discovery. This is basically what I'm looking at, okay? I'm hidden from the XML to some extent, but I am going to have to go through and provide those properties. Let me just look at the existing one here. But it's the same kind of thing, right? So at the very least, I can say, okay, it needs a target. Here are the targets that are available. So I'm not having to go and type those in and working straight with the XML. Which classes we're discovering. We can prompt for that. So again, there certainly is, when you get into the templates, we are trying to hide at least some of that complexity for you. Now again, because we're completely wide open here, we can work with any of the different modules that are out there. I mentioned in the earlier session that basically modules are these building blocks that we can build workflows from. And because the Visual Studio tool needs to be able to work with absolutely any of these modules that are available, it makes it difficult to provide a whole lot of UI because we have no idea what different modules that we might be using. We might be using some in a management pack we never saw before. We might be using some that we created ourselves. So as a result of that, usually when we're going to do the configuration, all these are standard configuration items for a discovery. But then when we get into, I have to configure my data source here. In fact, let me go back a little bit. This here is the data source that we're using. Okay, so a discovery requires a data source, and I go through in exhaustive detail in the training all the different kinds of modules or all the different workflows and the modules they use. So what we're looking at here is we say here are all the different modules that we can use for discovery. And you can kind of make these out here, right? We're doing a filtered registry discovery. Here's a PowerShell script discovery. There's WMI discoveries. Okay, but once I select that, we're then required to do its configuration. Now, if you saw doing UI work in MP Author is a little more straightforward than doing XML work. But this is the XML that gets generated for registry discovery. And at least it's fairly readable. You can see here all the registry attribute definitions we're doing. Here's the class that we're discovering. Here's the frequency that we're going to run the discovery. Here are how we're populating all the values. And again, I walked through all of this in the training online. And we are also providing some help here as far as some IntelliSense. So if I add here, okay, that we need if I wanted to add another attribute, we need attribute name, etc. Right? Same kind of thing. So at least we are providing you some assistance there. Again, in reality, how I typically build these things is if I was going to build another registry discovery, I'd probably copy and then paste that one, go through there, and start doing modifications. Right? That's usually how we're going to do this, as opposed to walking through. And I mean, and I absolutely do go through, and I think the registry discovery lesson is a little long because of it. I walk through building this thing step by step. But then once you have that, that's pretty much the last registry discovery you're ever going to build, because you're just going to do a copy paste and modify. And so again, it's more of that developer feel that we're trying to do. But so far, again, everything I showed so far, you could do an MP Author. So I haven't really shown you anything yet that will be a justification other than you just kind of like Visual Studio, you like working in code and prefer that style a little bit more. But why you're going to, the reason that you would have to move to a tool like this is when you're starting to do custom workflows and custom modules. And so let me just show an example here. Again, I'm certainly not going to walk through in gory detail, but just to give a flavor for how these things work. And again, this is an example that I walk through in complete detail to build in the online training. So this is actually a PowerShell script that goes through, and what this does is it just collects the number of entries in a queue. Remember, I mentioned before there is a queue that application stored for each store, and this script just goes through and collects for each of the queues that are available, and collects up the number of entries in it, and then presents that as a property bank so we can do monitoring on it. So what is nice is I can actually include here the script as a PS1 file. It's not embedded in something. This is actually stored on disk, right? I mean, this is just stored in the file system. I can drop down to a command line, I can run the PowerShell script for doing testing. That's exactly what we do in the training. So this script I can actually treat as a script as opposed to embedded in a module somewhere. But then a script in and of itself in a management pack is useless, right? I need a module to actually do something with it. And so what we do with this one is actually build a set of custom modules using that script. So in this case, it's this probe module here that we're doing that with, and we're required to go through and actually build out this XML. What's interesting here is notice, so this is a probe action, and again, I'm not going to go through the difference of the probe modules and the data source modules and all that, but this is a probe that runs a PowerShell script. What's nice here, notice my script body, I've just got this variable here, and what that says is include the body of this script. So again, I can manage my script element all by itself as an actual PS1 file and then embed it into the management pack as a variable. When we actually do the build, all of this code here basically gets put into this section of the XML. It gets replaced there. So the final XML will have that. Okay. But this here is a module that I've constructed that says, give me a folder where these queues live. We just implement this in the file system for ease of use, just for test purposes. And this probe module will run this one. We'll run that script and return a property bag. We then go through and build a data source module. I think this is the one, because there's actual modules on top of module on top of module that we do here. But this module here runs that probe action and puts in front of it a scheduler. So take that module that we put on top, that we wrap that script up in, and then run that on a timed basis. Okay, and then we have here another module that picks that one up. So that there it takes that data source module there that returned a property bag. Then it runs that through a condition detection module. This one's called data generic mapper. So what it does is it accepts in property bag data and spits out performance data. So that way, when I'm writing my management pack and doing my custom workflows, I can actually see this data come back as a property bag when I need it to do that. I can see it come back as performance data when I need it to do that, right? And so that's basically what this module does. If I want to use that one, it's going to take that and convert it here into performance data. So again, this is a whole day worth of training, quite honestly. When we do the live trainings, it's a couple of fairly healthy lessons in the online training. But again, this hopefully will give a flavor as to what this looks like, as I say, when you kind of take on that level of complexity. Right? If I look over here, let's see, just trying to remember where I stored these things. I think I did in Central. So here's a set of monitors. You saw your monitors in the MP Author tool. In fact, Randy built an aggregate monitor. And let me just kind of give the equivalent here of what this would look like. So here's a custom aggregate monitor. You can see I'm doing this with a template. So I'm kind of hidden, at least from some of the XML. But here's the information that I need to provide for that. Kind of, I guess, similar. It's the same information that Randy was providing, only not quite as friendly of a UI. Then to put other monitors into that one, those are actually properties on top of those monitors themselves. In this case, here's one of those monitors, and you can see its parent monitor ID here. That's how something gets dropped in an aggregate. And I can select of the available aggregates. Those are the standard ones that you can see there. So again, just trying to show that very different experience that we go through. But these are all the monitors that some of those are built on standard monitor types. Here are rules that are built on standard modules. Others have been built on custom modules that I've built into this project. And all those we go through. I think every single thing there I actually build in the online training, so you can get a look at that. Now what's interesting though, and just to illustrate this, so as we're looking at the template here, I can view the XML that gets generated from this. So all this XML that I'm looking at here is what got generated by these templates. Okay, and so just showing that we always end up with the actual XML. I mean, this actually is what everything gets generated in the management pack. You can't modify this XML, and there are times where you look at the template and say, wow, even the template's a little bit limiting. I need to do something that the template's not allowing me to do, in which case, no big deal. You create yourself a management pack fragment. Instead of doing this monitor or whatever other workflow you were creating, instead of doing it in the template, you could just write it straight into the XML. I mean, my entire management pack here could just be one giant MP fragment. Not a lot of use to doing that. You're defeating the whole point of using the tool. But so anyway, again, hopefully that gives at least a flavor of what this experience is like. My entire training is based on this tool and based on designing and building this management pack. So one other thing to show here, though, and Randy showed the testing and management pack in MP Author and MP Studio and that whole experience, and want to give you an idea of that test experience in Visual Studio. So this is something we call, in fact, you know what, let me back up before I do that. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me show the Management Pack browser, because that's actually where we launched the tool from. So the Management Pack browser, what this actually lets me do is view my current basically built management pack, as well as all the other management packs that this one's referencing in this project. So the reason you see two here, for instance, we see two Windows libraries of different versions, and the reason for that is I have two different MP files, each referencing, one uses one version of the schema, the other uses the other, and so they reference different versions of that library. And so over here, we're looking at every single MP file that's referenced by mine. And so what that allows me to do, I can go down, for instance, in the Windows library, look at the type library, and I can look at all of the different modules that are available to me. Okay, so these are all of the modules, as I said, all those building blocks that I can build discoveries and monitors and rules. These are all of the modules that are available. So if I look through here, I can see here's the, let's see, I might be looking at the wrong version. Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. I wanted the TimeScript PowerShell. So this runs a PowerShell script on a time basis and returns a property bag. So I can look at the details of this script here. Now again, this is fairly ugly in XML. You may think this isn't a whole lot of use. It looks very cryptic. But as we go through in the training, the only thing I really care about in here are these properties. What this does, again, runs a PowerShell script on a time basis. How it does that, I don't know. I don't care. All I know is if I provide it with these values, I give it interval seconds. In other words, how often do you want this to run? What's the name of the script? What arguments is it going to accept? What's the body of the script? As I showed before, that's my PS1 file. As long as I give it that information, it's going to run my script, produce a property bag. So using the Explorer here, or the Management Pack browser, I can actually go through and at least do some viewing of all the modules and building blocks that are available to me. I can also go through the Management Pack that I have, right? So this is the actual built version of it. So before I'm showing how all my classes, for instance, are split up into multiple different MP fragments, this is the final version of that. So here are all the classes that are defined in my MP file. Here's the final XML that's generated for those. Right? Same thing when I look at my health model. And here are all the monitors. And you saw I had those split up into multiple sections. But this is the XML for all the monitors that got generated. Okay, now what's interesting though is if we look at my type library, and here are all the modules that I built. Okay, so I think I was showing some of these modules before. Here they are in the actual built MP. Okay, so the browser on the one hand can just be used to go through, as I say, browse our current MP file as well as all the other ones that we're referencing. But the other thing that allows it to do is if I go here, and I'm not going to run it because it takes a long time to start and I already have it running, but I can go through, and this Q entries one, this is the monitor that's basically a monitor based on a custom monitor type. That custom monitor type is based on custom modules that run that script that I showed. But if I right-click here, I can say do an MP simulator. That's what runs our test tool, which is the MP simulator. I already have it open, so we don't have to wait for it. Now, this actually is running on my local machine here. Doesn't need to connect to a management group. Okay, I install the OpsMan agent locally. just so it has the bits that it needs. But what I can do is then provide in values. These values in the actual production MP would be read typically from the local machine, but I can provide different values here so I can test out. I can look, well, what if I change these different parameters so I can have it run against different values. What's interesting is when I do the start simulation, what this is doing is running locally, and rather than just kind of saying the thing worked, remember the whole point of this tool is that we can get underneath the covers and actually view kind of the XML and the actual data. So what I'm looking at here are the actual modules that ran for this management pack and the data that got passed between them. So in this case, the first thing that fired was just this trigger, which is what a schedule does. It says go ahead and start this workflow. The next is this is the output from my script. On my local machine here, I just have couple of folders to simulate our application, and it returned property bag data for these 3 different store codes. Remember that I had file count and oldest file, and again, we're just simulating queues with the file system, which just works out well for testing. The next module that runs is basically a filter that says I only want this one for this one store code. That's what matches with my value up here. So I can see that data source. So this is the final element that gets run against my conditions in my monitor. And you can see here I basically have 3 monitor conditions: under threshold, over threshold, and over warning. So in this case, it came in under threshold. My file count was 8. I have my warning threshold set to 30. So since that's well below, that's fine. If I were to change this, let's say 5 is my warning threshold, do another start simulation. I didn't test this, so assuming it works properly, I should see this show up as a warning. Sure enough, there we go. And you see the under threshold condition return nothing, over error return nothing, over warning did. So what that tells me is that monitor is going to trigger a warning health state. So this is actually really, really useful. First off, just as you're sitting here, you're working in Visual Studio, you've got all this code flying around, your compile works properly, okay, that's good, but does this thing actually work how I expect it to work? And so this is a great, great tool actually for doing an enormous help over our old method of basically just loading up the MP and crossing our fingers. But the other thing that it does is it really gives you this exposure to the data that's coming through your modules. Many times, you know, SNMP data or event data, sometimes you're not entirely sure what it's not working, I'm not sure why. Let me actually look at the data that's coming out of this module and inspect exactly what's going on. Right, a workflow has several modules that are running in succession. This allows me to basically inspect that at a test level. Okay, so again, very, very quick overview of that. That's what I had. So I think if we open it for questions, I think I left 5 minutes, right?
You did. You left a few minutes there. Thank you, Brian. That was excellent. You've got a lot of chatter going on in the chat box as well during this.
Did I scare people?
No.
Often when you start getting into custom modules, I start scaring people away.
See, it's all good. I'll go through a couple of questions here. Tom asks, in the build screen of the management pack, is there a place to register bugs in VSAE in the build screen of the management pack?
Is there a place to register what?
Bugs.
Is there a place to register? But we'll show. I don't have a place to necessarily record them, but let me at least show this. I mean, we are going to tell you when you have them. So when I try to do a compile, and I was going to show this and then just forgot. Let's just do one that I know is going to break this. So let's say I have this property. I forgot to do the type. Okay, and then let's try to build that thing. This should break very quick. Of course, it's taking a while now. That's supposed to break. Hey, okay. So then we see, you know, required attribute type is missing. It'll take me right. I could have an error in any of these files, right? So it'll take me right there, and I tell very quickly, right? I have an error there. Whether I'm not sure that answers the question or not.
Okay. Well, thank you for trying.
So, but yeah, I mean, obviously we are identifying when we can't do a compile. We're putting those in. I've got all, and I'm going to admit that I'm not a developer, so I'm not necessarily familiar with all the different features of Visual Studio. So there may be some other ones there that I'll just have to apologize and won't be able to answer.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Maybe time.
Brian, it's Mike Sargent here. Tom has followed up by saying, I don't mean the bug in the MP, I mean bugs in VSAE, perhaps the Connect site, ?
Oh, I'm sorry. You did allow me to show something that I forgot to show, so thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, is there a place for that? I mean, you should be able to through Connect, or you can certainly let me know and I'll pass it on to the team. I am in contact with the dev who works on this. So if there aren't any through your standard methods, then please just contact me, and I can put us right in touch with the dev who does it.
Great, thank you. Probably time for one more question. George asks, do you have any videos for the advanced website monitoring using Visual Studio Ultimate?
I don't, but I'll take that as a request. Yeah, I don't. Like I said, I mean, I've got 23 training videos out there. There are a couple that I know I have in mind that I just have not had the time to get to building those. But that's probably a great idea. So let me take that as I'll take that as a request for another lesson.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Brian and Randy, for, again, great presentations. Thank you, everyone.